Welcome to Black Sheep Cinema. I'm your host, the Cinemasochist, and I'd like to talk to you about Freddy Krueger. I'll admit firsthand that I've always been a Jason guy. The hockey mask, the machete, and Crispin Glover dance will always be my go-to franchise in the world of slasher fare. But that's not to say that I don't recognize A Nightmare on Elm Street and its fair share of successful sequels that put a stranglehold in the 80s and went head-to-head with old Jason Voorhees to equally match the power of the Friday the 13th sequels. It's more than noteworthy that the original Nightmare on Elm Street is what put New Line Cinema on the map as a real-deal reputable company, and turned Robert Englund from a somewhat goofy nice guy character actor from shows like V into one of the most well-known faces of horror of all time. It also helped kickstart Johnny Depp's megastar career, who at the time was just a nervous, pale, shy kid playing in a rock band. And of course, with a franchise as long-running as A Nightmare on Elm Street comes a personal favorite sequel. Here are a few fans that were kind enough to lend their time and tell you about their favorite Freddy outings.
Everything in A Nightmare on Elm Street, from the music, the set pieces, and even the gore, give it a visceral punch that remains unrivaled by any other horror movie, and that includes its sequels, to this day. The film works on a subconscious level by dredging up those childhood fears we have long since locked away. Things like fear of strangers, scary shadows on the wall, the boogeyman under our bed, and even that weird morbid trait children have of creating eerie lullabies to help ward away evil. Wes Craven's film not only psychologically assaults the characters in the story, but the audience as well, by stripping away all those safe havens we've built up in our minds over the years. Freddy doesn't just attack the person, but the places that we all feel the most safe and secure. The warmth of our beds, being surrounded by family and friends, the bathtub, heck, even jail. And therein lies the simple brilliance of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Because if there's no place you can't fall asleep, then there is no place Freddy can't get you.
Of all the Nightmare on Elm Streets, my personal favorite has to be Part 3, Dream Warriors. It was the first horror movie that I ever saw in the theater. Now, I was way too young to actually be seeing this movie, so me and some friends snuck into the theater and saw it, and it was awesome. But aside from that, when I got a little bit older and went back and watched it again, I found myself enjoying it because they did a lot of things to expand the Freddy Krueger character. 3, in my mind, was the quintessential Freddy movie. He had a little bit more personality this time, he cracked some jokes, and it set up a lot of what Freddy kind of eventually turned into. Now, I thought that some of the later Nightmares, he was a little too silly, but he still, you gotta love the character. They also did some really cool stuff that they didn't follow up too much with the other movies. With that, I mean the kids using the dreams to fight back. I always thought that that was cool. I did love the D&D kid, that was hilarious. While I do personally prefer Jason Voorhees, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is one of the best iconic horror characters of all time. So anyway, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors, best of the series. And with Dokken on the soundtrack, best song of the series.
Hello everyone, it's Bill Sylvia of Necro Cinema Ex Mortis and Man in Black Reviews. I'd like to talk about my two favorite Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, Wes Craven's New Nightmare and A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is unique as it's a darker look at the original in a real-world setting that can make you terrified of things you're more likely to find in the everyday world. It ends the series in a growl, and it's just an accomplishment after the train wreck that was Freddy's Dead before. A Nightmare 3, on the other hand, is a high point at the center. It expands the mythology, drawing in parts 1 and 2, while leaving story settings for parts 4 and 5 to pick up later.
Hey CM, it's Drowning in Footwear, and my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie is Freddy vs. Jason. I'm sure everyone else is going to try to sound all smart and artsy by saying that New Nightmare is the best, but fuck that. It's just so satisfying seeing these two characters finally come together and rip each other to shreds. It's awesome. But back when this movie was in theaters 100,000 years ago, I definitely was not as big of a horror fan as I am now. I think like the only horror movies I had seen up to that point were like Candyman and Pumpkinhead and Ernest Scared Stupid. But I was familiar with the characters like everyone is, and I think I was sort of expecting, like most people were probably expecting, this to just be a lazy cash-in or a novelty, and it really wasn't. It turned out to be a really good, well-written, massively entertaining movie. Like, I thought the whole way that he got these two characters to sort of come together and fight, the whole plot device of Freddy having to go into Jason's dreams and make him kill all these kids to get his powers back, that was really smart, and the fight scenes were really smart, and just the way that the two characters interacted with each other, like with Freddy sort of having to outsmart Jason because he's this massive powerhouse and be the trickster and learn what makes Jason tick and doing stuff like dunking him in the water. It really played to both characters' strengths really well. And also I really just like Freddy's one-liners in it a lot, like when he's chasing the black girl and he goes, "Sweet, dark meat." That to me is hilarious, because I'm a racist. So, anyways, this is the Footwear Man, and that's my favorite. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go see Cabin in the Woods for the 5th time.
As for me, I'm pretty partial to A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. This movie gets so much fucking flack. I mean, okay, I can understand the fan uproar for movies like Friday the 13th Part 5 and Halloween 3. Getting butthurt over the lack of real Jason Voorhees and no Michael Myers at all makes some sense, but Nightmare 2 had it all. Let's look at the story in general, just from the Freddy standpoint. This is Freddy not just invading the nightmares of the teens of Springwood to kill them, he's actually trying to get reborn back into the real world using a teenager as his host, a mission that he never seemed to try to follow up with in the other sequels. Enter Jesse Walsh, everyday teenager, just moved into town with his family, he's having nightmares, they're Freddy related. Oh, but wait, he's a gay. Oh no! Butch up and grab your pitchforks, give me a fucking break. If you're not thick-headed, you've noticed that Nightmare 2 is quite gay. Many of the people that worked on this film said that the notion that things in the movie were homoerotic had gone directly over their heads. But writer David Chaskin wrote the homoeroticism intentionally. In interviews, he states that he meant to write it that way. Openly gay actor Mark Patton, who plays the lead Jesse Walsh, also states that he had noticed it. My only guess in people ignoring it is straight-up homophobia, because seriously, you didn't notice this shit? Or, you know, this?
Something is trying to get inside my body. Yeah, and she's female and she's waiting for you in the cabana. And you want to sleep with me.
Though apparently fans have noticed it, because there are people that have written Nightmare 2 off as a non-canon sequel, and some have done so because the film features a gay male protagonist. Is it really so wrong that this movie broke formula? So Jesse Walsh isn't a blonde virginal girl with big breasts, or a tall muscular Adonis with an epic chin. Big fucking deal. What he is a normal kid, going to school every day with friends and everyday problems. Does he swing from the other side of the plate? Yeah. Does the movie ram that notion into your face? Not fucking really. He isn't portrayed as a stereotypical flamboyantly gay character that parades around letting the entire city block know where he puts his genitals. That, if anything, is the kind of shit that bothers me, whether for homo or hetero characters. What difference does it usually ever make to the outcome of the story if the hero is dating someone, or how often he or she gets laid, or whether they pitch or fucking catch? Absolutely nothing. Jesse is a relatable person. He's got a dad that gets on his tits about cleaning his room, he's got a buddy that he shoots the shit with, a girl that has a crush on him but he doesn't know how to deal with it, and that doesn't even have to be part of the gay thing. That's actually kind of realistic in general. I mean, isn't that kind of how crushes tend to work? You like someone, but you don't know if they like you back. And while all of this is going on in his life, he's got an evil dream demon child murderer trying to take over his body. What's not to like?
Well, Sam, this movie doesn't feature the theme created by Charles Bernstein in the original film.
Well, suck it, smart marks, because a sequel almost didn't even happen. Wes didn't want it to. Harry Manfredini never scored the Friday the 13th films the exact same way. Sure, each one kept with the sounds, but just compare the theme from the first film to the theme from the second film. It's pretty goddamn different. This isn't like how John Carpenter intended to do 2 straight Halloween films. Nightmare 2 was a shot in the dark, and it being made is what truly opened the floodgates for the later sequels.
You are all my children now.
Okay, so I love this movie. I love this franchise. I love horror films. But that's my perspective. What about somebody that normally wouldn't watch a horror film? In fact, probably detests horror films. I just so happen to know somebody like that with their own unique take on what this movie has to offer.
Time! It's time!
It's time for Infamous Queer.
Well, good morrow to you all. Those of you who follow my show may be wondering why I'm suddenly making an appearance here. Well, it's not because I've suddenly acquired an insatiable passion for horror movies. To be honest, I hate them. But fear not, I'm not here to insult the concept of horror movies in general either. So why am I here? Well, you may have noticed one thing about CM, and you may have noticed one thing about this film. CM is not gay. This film is. And oh, how it is! Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is more flaming than a drag queen performing a routine while on fire. And I'm not just talking about all that frequent spontaneous combustion. From the copper phallus on the kitchen wall to Jesse's pop gun penis dance, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is bursting with homoeroticism. Let's start with the smallest details. It's almost as if the filmmakers were dressing the set to provide as many homoerotic themes as possible. There's the aforementioned metallic penis on the wall. Jesse's room has a sign reading "No Chicks Allowed" on the door, and there's also a board game called Probe in his closet. There's also a bizarre scene which has absolutely nothing to do with the plot, where Jesse dances around to a campy song while wearing gold glittery sunglasses. We are first introduced to Jesse outside the world of his dreams, when he wakes up, shirtless and drenched in sweat. Yes, indeed! It only took 5 minutes for the movie to start doling out the homoeroticism. And this is only one of many occasions where Jesse is shown sweaty and mostly nude. At school, Jesse is frequently taunted by his coach Schneider, who looks like the kind of guy who escaped off the set of Cruising. It only takes half an hour for the film to become explicitly gay, with Jesse running into Schneider in a gay bar. Schneider is then killed by being pelted with balls, being stripped naked, dragged into the shower, tied up, and then having his ass whipped with wet towels. Jesse himself is clearly intended to be viewed as a homosexual character. He's friendly with his supposed love interest Lisa, but the minute he tries to engage in any kind of sexual activity with her, Freddy takes possession of his body and Jesse is forced to stop in disgust. He then runs to his friend Grady's house in horror, breaking into his room and then begging that Grady, who is currently half naked, watch him sleep. For some reason, Grady also seems to have a leather doona cover. Maybe he's been shopping in the same place as Coach Schneider. It's clear that Jesse is horrified by the way that Freddy is making him behave, which can be interpreted on some level as the turmoil that many young people feel about their sexuality. They are confused, and they don't want to feel the way that they do, but they are controlled by their feelings. When one takes into account Jesse's horrified cries about someone trying to take over his body, there are references to rape and molestation to take on board. Usually this sort of violation happens to female characters. I'm not a horror fan, but I enjoyed this movie. Jesse isn't an invulnerable, unflappable protagonist, but neither is he a scream queen. His struggle to deal with Freddy with only the help of a close friend mirrors the way some people come to terms with their sexuality, and it's refreshing to see a male, gay character in this sort of role. A lot of people hate this movie because of the homoeroticism, but I say, get over it! If you can deal with fan service with female characters, why should fan service with male characters be any different? I don't know how this movie stands in the canon of Freddy Krueger movies, but as a standalone movie, it's pretty fun. I think I've had my fill of Freddy, but I'm glad I watched this.
I think that about sums it up. If somebody that isn't even into slasher films can enjoy this movie for its character merits alone, why can't the overall community of horror fans embrace this film for everything that it has? Freddy himself is just as creepy here as he was in the first film, perhaps even a little more so. It's absolutely perverse the way he toys with Jesse, like when he takes over his body for a short period of time, just to stand over Jesse's sleeping sister with his gloved hand poised and ready to strike. The special effects in this movie are also fantastic. Just take a look at the scene where Freddy rips his way out of Jesse's body. It's a wonderful showcase of clever camera trickery and incredible practical prosthetic effects that weren't only great for their time, but still hold up to this day. Mark Patton, who played Jesse Walsh, kind of disappeared off the face of the earth shortly after this film was released, which is unfortunate because I really feel that he showed true blue acting chops in Nightmare 2. Thankfully, he resurfaced and embraced his part in the Nightmare legacy by partaking in the documentary Never Sleep Again in 2010, and has been showing that he is incredibly passionate about Nightmare 2 and the series in general, even writing what he's dubbed as Jesse's Journals, which he posts on his Facebook page. It's an interesting read, and if you haven't friended him on Facebook, do so right this second and show him your support. He's a rather amazing individual. Well, that was the first edition of Black Sheep Cinema. I hope you'll be joining me next time for when I try to shed some light on an entry in the Friday the 13th series that gets a ton of battering from the fans. Roy Burns, I salute you.